two, one, two, three, four.
Just very brief introduction. I'm an historian for Greek-Roman history. I hold a degree in philosophy, and for 10 years I have been dealing with the foundations of the European culture. The slogan or the motto of today's convention is "Give peace a chance." And if we take a look at the conflicts of today's world, it's plain to see that apart from political pit bulls, it's religious belligerents that make sure that peace on earth is only possible in certain sectors, if ever. And this goes especially for the monotheistic religions, where they are dominant. In their sacred books, you find openly or hidden powerful roots of violence. If the only God who does not allow for other gods next to him marries the idea that he knows the sole truth, you don't need to look back on history to understand the potential violence that comes from this kind of mindset. But the European Christianity has been confronted through Enlightenment with itself and also with its behavior. Christianity of medieval times could not stand up to a David Hume, a Voltaire, or Immanuel Kant. So it was de-radicalized step by step. And this shows the way how religious barbarism can turn into controlled zeal for the faith. This is by reason. And if the analysis of the de-radicalization of the Christian churches by European Enlightenment is correct, then it should also become clear that only a de-radicalized European Islam, that according to the doctrine does not exist, could be part of a free Europe and a free Germany. This idea of a moderate, quote, European Islam is just as little a utopia like the idea of Protestantism in the 16th century in the ultra-Catholic Germany, or the proclamation of the Turkish Republic along the lines with the abolishment of the Caliphate in the year 1923. Let me give you an example. Just 1 month ago, the Muslim Forum Germany was founded. Celebrities of public life from science, journalism, and other sectors are part of this forum. They stand up for democracy, human rights, and a humanistic-oriented Islam, and want to give a voice to the majority of the Muslims who live in Germany who don't have a voice until now. And as I said, this idea seems only utopian of a moderate or an enlightened Islam only at first sight, because you find role models for the Muslim Forum also in the past, not only in the Turkey of Kemal Atatürk, but also during the phase of the Islam-Arab Empire between 700 and 1400. So in the following 35 minutes, I will talk to you about this Arab Islam between 700 and 1400. It shows us an Islam where everybody could rise to the highest offices, no matter which faith they belong to. And Christians could live in peace, paying a ridiculously small church tax. And I will not talk about an Islam somewhere in the nirvana of Arabian deserts, but about an Islam right in front of our doors. In Spain, in Portugal, Sicily, South Italy, North Africa. I will present you with 500 years of Arab Islamic advanced civilization that historians in Germany do not talk much about. And I will compare this Arab Islamic advanced culture with the medieval Christian monastery culture. The latter is oftentimes quoted in historical literature in Germany as the source of European culture, and lately also in the lately published biography, where you find innumerous hymns of praise for the monastery culture. The comparison of two cultures is admissible because both cultures grow on the former Imperium Romanum. Both use more or less the antique legacy. Both saw the migrations of the peoples. And this is how, between 700 and 1400 in West and South Europe, two cultural areas face each other that are founded on the Greek-Roman legacy. And nevertheless, with regards to their culture and their civilization, they are light years apart. So my presentation is based on the book The Christian Occidental Culture, Allegiant. The book is part of a trilogy that deals with the development and the coming up of the European culture. The Giordano Bruno Foundation published the results in the form of a brochure. It's available at the entrance, also in English. So in English and in German. So please do not hesitate to take several copies with you to hand it over to interested people at home. And the brochure falsifies the buzzword of the Christian Occident. Let me tell you something about the spreading of the Islam. In a fabulously fast military campaign in the 7th century, the sons of the desert charged beyond the borders of the Arabian Peninsula, the sword in one hand, the Quran in the other hand, yelling, "There's no God except Allah and Muhammad is his prophet." Even though there is no charismatic Alexander in command of the Arabic troops, the Arabian victories are easy to be gained and the battles are of no importance. Most of the cities fall into the hands of the conquerors with an intact cultural life and intact libraries, most of them following a formal surrender treaty. Many of the conquered cities and peoples like Jews and Christians, Jacobites and Manichees and Samaritans support the Arabs in conquering the country, probably to be freed from the yoke of Byzantium, but probably also for religious reasons. Because unlike Catholicism, Islam acknowledges Jewish and Christian religions as sister religions. And they are offered fair and tolerant treatment and also favorable tax conditions. To give you a feeling for what happened between 700 and 1400 in Sicily and on the Hispanic Peninsula, so in Spain and Portugal, and how this culture has to be assessed for the development of Europe, I would like to compare the Caliph culture with the monastery culture. I will give you a couple of examples, and let's start with the most important cultural element, the educational system. Islam at the time holds no objections against sciences. Science and knowledge is necessary for the right Islamic way of living, to gain the pleasure of Allah and to be able to gain paradise. Blind faith is not desired for, because faith means conviction that is based on knowledge. For this reason, every Muslim must take care to have at least a healthy basic knowledge. This means that basic knowledge in Islam is a basic claim that comes from Quran. Education, upbringing, and institutions that convey this education enjoy an excellent reputation in Islam. The access is not limited to the clergy or to aristocracy, like we see that in the monastery culture. This is not the case in Islamic education. The Islamic school education is provided in maktabs, some kind of elementary school to learn reading and writing and to recitate the Quran. And at the madrasa, higher education is transmitted. And the boundaries between these locations of learning seems to be blurred. The famous Persian Islamic philosopher Ibn Sina, known in the West under the name of Avicenna, uses the word maktab in both senses and claims to send children as of age 6 to school. It is a fact that Islam has a ramified school system that is frequented by boys and girls. Scientific studies usually are carried out of the Quran schools under the patronage of the princely courts, where the scientists work. Around 900, almost every mosque maintains a school for the education of boys and girls. This means that in the medieval Islamic world, a grade of an literacy level is reached that is not even close to what happens in the Latin Christian world. The American historian Emma Wills says, education was so largely spread that people said it is difficult to find a Muslim who is not able to read and write. I don't know if this is too rosy a description, but it is in accordance with the traditional texts, with the religious claims to the single person to be able to read the Quran without a priest, and also with the proven advanced Islamic Arabic culture in all areas, and that could have only spread under the condition of a large education among the people. First of all, I would like to deal with the Christian medieval school system. And I would like to do away with the prejudice that the monks at the time strived to take care of their education and the education of people around them. Apart from exemptions until the high medieval times, this was not the case. Neither Benedict of Murcia, the founders of the Benedictine monastery, claims in his 73 rules for education, nor is education the monks of the monks who withdraw behind the walls to be of service of God. And their everyday working life does not provide them with time to take care of education in a classical sense. I don't want to speak against the spirituality of the monks. Who looks for his God or seeks his God in the loneliness of the forest is allowed to do so, and tolerance obliges us to respect him. But to adore the monks as saviors of the antique culture, this goes too far, and I will come back to that later on. Let me talk about the Christian Catholic school landscape. It's completely different from the Islam-Arabian one. Because unlike in Islam, Catholicism is dominated by a clergy who read from the sacred books and interpret them. Thus, you don't need faithful who know how to read and write. And thus, the Latin-speaking Christian medieval can do completely without public schools. It's enough if priests know how to read and write. Even the emperors oftentimes do not know how to write. The images in the so-called Bibles for the poor and on the walls of the churches have to be enough for the people. Pope Gregor I writes in the year 600 to the Bishop of Marseille, the images in the churches are important for the idiote. And the consequences are clear. The drying out of the public schools, due to the drying out of the public schools, 95% of the people do not know how to read and write. At the same time, while the public schools decline, the monasteries open internal and external schools, and they provide education for the future generation of the monastery. They do not provide the education of the people, because there must be somebody who is able to read the holy books. If children are accepted in these schools, in the monastery schools, they are children that are given from their parents in some kind of child sacrifice along the line of the Old Testament, or children where the parents pay an entrance sacrifice, or where the inheritance of the child is transferred to the monastery. We cannot speak in the case of the monastery schools, about schools that can be compared with the well-organized schools of the Imperium Romanum, but these are purely church schools with the objective to educate the future clergy or the offspring coming from the princely courts in a very narrow-minded way. So the objective is not to enhance the education level of the people, but to prepare people for the service to God. And the level of the education is usually very low, and the syllabus goes along the line of the objectives of the church: education in faith, liturgy, baptism, exorcism, a funeral, Bible, and Holy Scriptures. Knowledge in arithmetics, geometry, or astronomy are only necessary insofar they are necessary for the allegoric interpretation of numbers with regard to God. So selected antique authors like Cicero, Virgil, or Horace are only used in order to learn a good Latin, not for literary education. The exclusion of big parts, of major parts of the population from education, and the reduction of classical education to a very limited education are predictable, and they end in a catastrophe. So natural sciences dries out. There's no demand for engineering, and education in a classical sense does not exist. Without schools, public libraries, without thermal springs and theaters, the cities decline, and the controversial term of Dark Ages becomes legitimate. Let me compare medicine. After the capture of Syria and Persia, the Arabs take over Greek medical knowledge. At the same time, the Arabian physicians expand their knowledge, because in Persia the best physicians of the times are available. The West Persian city Guandispur maintains already in 271 a medical academy where medicine, natural sciences, and philosophy are taught in a cross-faculty unity. The 10th century is the peak of Islam Arab medicine expertise. In every bigger city, you find a hospital with different specialized departments. We know that Baghdad in 982 had a hospital with 24 physicians. In surgery, people work with opium or with a sponge, with a mixture of cannabis and henbans. And the physicians try to help the sick with the help of tracheotomies. Pharmacology is also highly developed. The pharmacists are monitored by the government in order to prevent from the distribution of spoiled medicine, and they provide the population with medication. The Arab medicine, thus, is a highly developed Greek, Roman, Persian, Indian collective medicine, and the credit for the synthesis, for systemizing and expanding the text goes to the Arabs. This exemplary synthesis of medical knowledge from people from all over the world is especially suited to understand the fascinating development of the Islam-Arab culture as an intercultural process, and as the precondition for the rapid rise of the Arab culture. Let's come to the monastic medicine. In that time, Central Europe only knows very moderate and in many ways falsified rests of the antique medicine that is offered, first of all, to take care of the sick monks. Starting points are the Old Testament and the teachings of the fathers of the Church, who believe that sicknesses are sent by God, and to consider medical sciences as a reprehensible activity, given that they interfere with the God's plan of salvation. The diagnosis was God punishes the sinners, and the power of the saints is way more helpful to heal people than the medicines of Hippocrates or Galen. You are healed the easiest way by penitence and invocation of the saints. Public hospitals and pharmacies do not exist, and medical research is considered superfluous. Basically, the medical care until the 13th century is a medicine of herbs, stones, and penitence that leads to an inflation of pilgrimage as a remedy for sicknesses and leads to an escalated number of patron saints that are held responsible for certain sufferings and illnesses. The expert judgment is very clear. Mathematics. The Arabs take over Greek mathematics but do not stop there, or at their adaptation. One of the most important Arab mathematics of its time, Al-Khwarizmi, writes mathematic books like algebra and the book of addition and subtraction along the lines of Hinduistic calculation. And behind that you find the numerative system from India, 1 to 9. This new Indian numerative system is a revolution in mathematics and one of the most important contributions to human civilization and sciences, because the new Indian Arab numerals have a denominational meaning, and calculating with those figures is way easier than with the Roman numerals. The Arab scholars soon realize the significance of these numerals and the decimal positions, and they become the pacemakers of the new system and transfer it to Europe. The monastery mathematics. And at the same time, mathematics of Christian Central Europe remains on the level of the basic arithmetics until the 13th century. And only a small elite in the cloister or in the monastery schools know how to apply mathematics. Even the simple calculating with using the abacus or calculator is mostly restricted to single experts in monastery administration, in finances, and in some sectors of crafts. While the monks try to get a better insight into mathematics, their thirst for knowledge usually stops at the maxim that God creates everything in measure, figure, and weight perfectly. The English historian and monk William of Malmesbury describes, still in the 12th century, mathematics as a dangerous Saracen magi that will call for the spirits of hell. Now, there's nothing much to add on Christian mathematics. Let's compare the cultures of the cities. We don't have images of early medieval cities, but we have description. And this is how they looked like. In the Islam Arab cities, Baghdad, Toledo, Damascus, Alexandria, Cordoba, Sevilla, and Cairo, the cities were in a competition and tried to outdo one another. In the 10th century, Cordoba had coupled streets that were illuminated in the dark, and several hundreds of bathhouses where, like in the ancient Roman times, the major part of the public and private life took place. Apart from the pure experience of bathing, they provided social life, cosmetic beauty and massages, manicure, refreshments, and they were open for everybody from early morning until late night. No place in Europe provided more taste, more sophistication, more elegance than the Muslim cities. The first female poet from Germany, Roswitha von Gandersheim, around 950, a statue of her, you can find a statue of her in Regensburg, hands over the crown to Cordoba. She writes, "This city is the adornment of the world." The distance of civilization between the Christian Central European urban culture and the Arabian culture is huge. The Christian cities in Central Europe vegetate on a very low level. And along the lines of the idea that people need to be in service of God, it is not schools, theaters, or libraries in the center of thought, but it's sacral buildings and bishopsees which occupy the best places in the city that are surrounded by city walls, while the cities beyond the centers overgrow with houses in twisted alleyways that take away the light from the world, from the people. The neglect is accelerated by a dark mixture of sin, penitence, and indulgence that lies like mildew over the cities. The clergy admonish to return to God, and they generate a tsunami of feelings of sin and penitence when they claim about the people being guilty for the death of Christ. And who would be interested in the face of the last judgment, where the dead will writhe with grinding of their teeth? Who will take care of maintaining an aqueduct or building new streets? Woe to you, the day will come, and nobody knows the hours. This is what echoed for centuries in the corners of a country that was bereft of its senses. The Heavenly Father, this is what the priest shouted out, scandalized, will judge everybody. So in Central Europe, the non-clerical urban culture broke down, while in antiquity, even the smallest towns in the country had subterranean sewages. Only 1,000 years later, most of the people in the medieval cities took care of their needs in the corners of the streets. And if cloacas are available, they need to clean them themselves. Otherwise, feces are just emptied out on the streets, where the next rain or little creeks will take care of them. So in many cases, the feces remain on the streets for many days and lead to heavy odor annoyances, especially during the warm season. Pigs are running through the street, and sometimes they attack people. And along the lines of the irrational customs of the time, in these cases, sometimes you see animal proceedings where the animal and the owner of the animal need to appear in court. For example, in 1266, 1268, in Paris, a pig is sentenced to death for child murder. So what Europe owns to Islam. So starting in the 12th century, the advanced culture penetrates Central Europe. With the conquest of Al-Andalus by Christian troops from the north of Spain, the Spanish-French border gets porous. In 1085, the city of Toledo is conquered by the Christian troops, and the conquerors find themselves puzzled in face of the treasures of architecture, of science and arts with regard to engineering and urban planning. A rededication starts, and Toledo becomes the center of Latin translation and becomes the pivotal point with regard to the export of Arabian sciences to Christian Central Europe. Algebra, Arabic numerals, observatories, paper, medical scriptures, everything comes to Europe, first slowly, but later on like a stream. At the same time, the Arab knowledge comes to Central Europe via Sicily. The island, since 827, finds itself under the influence of the Arabs, and becomes, under the dominance of the Muslims, an important economic and cultural center of the Mediterranean world. And then there we see also dynamic trade relationships between Sicily, South Italy, and Amalfi, Pisa, and Genoa. And it's no surprise that the Renaissance and the revival of the antiquity finds its peak in Italy. Obstetricians are the antique sciences in Arab government. I would like to talk to you about the significance of Arab Islam for Europe in a larger context and in form of theses. It shows the genesis of the European culture in a form that you have probably never heard of until now. You find these theses also in the brochure I mentioned of Giordano Bruno Stiftung. So I talked about points 5 and 6, and I will briefly depict all the steps to you. First, Europe's culture is based on classical Athens, when oracles and fortune tellers were replaced by reason and by the word of citizens. When democratic participation of all acknowledged citizens was decided, when theaters were founded, and unparalleled, beautiful, classical works of arts were created. Second, Rome completes the Greek culture, orders it, organizes it, provides the people with right and law, with thermal springs and theaters, with streets and cities. The Romans develop a corpus of legal norms that is being taught still today. They express their codex in a principle that is still valid today. All men are free and equal in nature. Third, the antique culture ends with the nomination of Catholicism as the state church in the year 380. This year marks a change of paradigm, because the culture of dogma replaces the antique cultures in the alliance with the state power. Fourth, the mindset that dominates now is the concentration of the afterlife, and the authorian conviction of the Church to know the truth paralyzed creativity and research, education and science. Without public schools, libraries, theaters and sewage, the cities decline. The urban culture breaks down and the cities collapse. The free spirit withdraws behind as a spirit of churches behind the walls of the monasteries. At the same time, when the north declines, the cities, the Islamic cities in Europe rise to their cultural peaks. They rise in a very short time like phoenix from the ashes. They adapt the Greek-Roman culture, they adapt Indian, Asian and Persian contributions, they organize, complete what they acquired, and they dominate the world between 700 and 1400. They dominate the world between the Indus and the Atlantic. The new Islam-Arab culture turns into the measuring stick of all cultures. Cordoba is called the adornment of the world, and Baghdad is considered the global stronghold of wisdom. 6. And starting in the 13th century, the Islam-Arab knowledge penetrates Central Europe. After 1,000 years of darkness, parts of the anti-culture turn to their origins. And Europe becomes heir and beneficiary of the heathen antiquity and blossoms in Renaissance. The dark medieval ages change, and the forces, the creative forces that have been suppressed for such a long time, find new room for development, even if they are limited. But they need a new force to overcome Inquisition and Reconquista. This is the Enlightenment. In the 18th century, the Enlightenment starts the revolution for freedom, participation, and human rights. Their undying formula is do have the courage to use your own mind and your own reason. Their claim for democracy, freedom, and equality are the political values that are still characterizing the Western Hemisphere and give its charism. Together with the ethnic discussion of the antiquity, They form the canon of value that are acceptable for all men, no matter which religion they belong to. So the antiquity, the Islam-Arab advanced culture, and Enlightenment are the major elements of European Western culture. The contribution of the Christianity in the form of the Catholic Church is obvious, especially since the Gothic age. But with regard to the contribution as a church and as a culture for the democratic development of Europe, it is of minor importance, because Christian culture means church culture, nothing else. Free thought is not a recognition of this sectorial culture, and self-criticism, innovation, and being different aren't either. And wherever the religious works of Renaissance and the times after are defined as a peak of art and craft, they have to be considered as a late stage of a partial culture. A partial culture that was around for 1,000 years impeded the scientific and non-sacral development of Europe for 1,000 years. Thank you very much for your attention.